Game Boy Advance has been through several different revisions over its life, from the original version released in 2001 to its final form factor in the Micro, released in 2005. Today's video will focus on the original Game Boy Advance console, which is arguably the least desirable given the lack of a backlit screen. Join me as we attempt to transform my personal original Game Boy Advance system from this to this. Hi everyone, my name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today, we're going to transform this original Game Boy Advance into something that is truly special. For this build, I'll be using a Boxy Pixel shell and an AGS 101 backlit LCD panel to really transform this device into a Game Boy Advance beast. If this is your first time watching this channel and you're interested in repairing, restoring, or modifying retro game consoles, consider subscribing. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of Boxy Pixel. I did several videos on their products, ranging from their Game Boy Macro faceplate to their awesome Game Boy Color shells. Boxy Pixel products are truly premium, and when you hold a finished device in your hands, it really transforms the gaming experience. In addition to the aluminum shell, I'll be using Boxy Pixel aluminum buttons that have been anodized red, as well as a glass screen lens. Also, keep in mind that this kit will require some soldering because the shell does not allow for the use of removable AA batteries. Like the Game Boy Color shells I've reviewed in the past, we will need to install a 2000 mAh lithium-ion battery in order to power the unit. So, in this video, I'm going to show you how to complete this mod, going through all the required steps and components needed, followed by a price breakdown, and lastly, an overview of the final result and my overall opinion of this build. Also, be sure to watch all the way to the end of the video for an update regarding the Game Boy Color giveaway, which will go live very soon. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get right into it. To do this mod, you'll need the following items. Please feel free to pause the screen so you can take note of them. Alright. Once you've gathered all your tools and parts, we can start the modification. To get started, let's turn the console over and remove the 6 tri-wing screws. Don't forget to remove the small Phillips screw at the bottom behind the battery door. With the console apart, let's remove the RF shielding on the rear housing. Next, remove the R and L shoulder buttons. Now disconnect the LCD ribbon cable from the motherboard. Remove the 2 Phillips screws securing the motherboard to the front shell housing, then lift the motherboard out and set everything aside. Next, grab your Boxy Pixel front shell housing. Peel the protective film from the AGS 101 LCD, then place it into the front shell housing. Place the protective film back onto the LCD to protect it from fingerprints and debris. Now place the buttons and membranes into the front shell housing. And don't forget to install the power LED light pipe. Set aside the front shell housing for now. Let's start working on the rear housing. We are now going to install the RF shield onto the Boxypixel rear housing. Be sure to use the provided Boxypixel screws, as the original Nintendo screws will not fit. We will not be using any of the original Game Boy Advance screws in this build. Now grab your trusty PCB holder. We will use it to assist us in removing the positive and negative battery terminal leads. The PCB holder makes this a breeze. If you would like to purchase one, I have a link in the description below. Next, we will need to trim the cartridge pins flush to the motherboard. Use your flush cutters for this. And be sure to use eye protection. You will also need to trim the pins opposite of the 3.5mm headphone jack. Now grab 2 pieces of thin gauge wire at about 4 inches in length each. Solder each wire to the positive and negative battery terminal pad on the front side of the motherboard as shown. Next, install your ribbon cable adapter to the motherboard. Depending on the revision of your Game Boy Advance, you will either need a 32 or 40 pin adapter. Confirm which revision you have prior to performing this mod. Lock the ribbon cable in place. Next, connect the ribbon cable adapter to the AGS101 LCD ribbon cable as shown. Now fold the ribbon cable over to the front of the PCB and tape it in place. This will help keep the ribbon cable flat against the motherboard during installation. Place the motherboard onto the front shell housing. Screw it in place using the 2 Phillips screws. If you're finding this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll really help me out. Now grab the 3D printed bracket and slide in the USB charging PCB as shown. We will now solder the diode to the PCB in order to reduce the battery voltage. Take note of the gray strip. This denotes the diode's orientation. Solder the diode to the out positive through hole. Trim the excess lead length on the bottom of the PCB. We can now screw the 3D printed bracket to the front shell housing. I'll be using some heat shrink tubing for this next step, but it's optional. Pre-tin the diode leg and solder it to the positive wire as shown. It should look something like this. Trim any excess length from the diode leg. Now pre-tin the through holes on the charging PCB. Solder the negative wire to the out negative through hole. Now grab your lithium-ion battery. Solder the black wire to the B negative through hole and the red wire to the B positive through hole. Next, solder the red wire from the flex cable adapter to the top left leg of DA1. Tape the wire in place so it stays out of the way. Let's give it a quick test. Alright, everything looks good. Place the R and L shoulder buttons into the front shell housing. Okay, now let's button up the console. Secure the rear housing to the front using the last 4 Phillips screws. Alright, let's clean our workstation up a bit. That's much better. Now there's one last thing to do, and that's install the glass screen lens. And there you have it, the ultimate all-metal Game Boy Advanced. Wow guys, I can't even tell you how absolutely stunning this Game Boy Advance is. The weight of the unit has a real heft to it and it feels really great to hold. The aluminum buttons are great and almost feel more responsive, and the AGS 101 screen is fantastic. It's really, in my opinion, the way Game Boy Advance games were meant to be played. Don't get me wrong, I love the new IPS solutions out there, but for that authentic gameplay and color rendering, the AGS 101, in my opinion, is the way to go. These games were designed with this specific LCD panel in mind. So, let's break down price. I'm going to assume you already have a donor console, so I won't include that in the final price tally. To start, the Boxy Pixel shell is about $70. These shells can fit either the AGS 101 LCD or the Funny Playing IPS, so it's definitely quite a versatile kit. Next, you're going to need buttons. I purchased the Boxy Pixel buttons, which were about $18. These are optional, and the original buttons will work just fine. Next, you're going to need to decide which LCD screen you want. This kit accepts either the AGS 101 or the IPS LCD, and you're going to spend anywhere between $50 and $78 depending on the choice you make. The next thing you're going to need is a battery. On the Boxy Pixel website, you can buy a specifically designed battery for the kit for about $9. Next, you're going to need to buy the charging PCB as well as the accompanying 3D printed bracket. If you have your own 3D printer, you can actually print the bracket yourself. The STL file is provided on the Boxy Pixel website. Lastly, I purchased a glass screen lens for this kit, but you can use the plastic ones, and the OEM screens fit fine. You don't need to buy a specially designed custom lens for this kit. So, the total is going to run you anywhere between $135 and $190, depending on the components that you choose. This is not a cheap mod by any measure. Aside from the cost, there is so much to love about this build. Before I get into that, however, I just want to make it clear that I am in no way sponsored by Boxy Pixel. I bought this Game Boy Advance shell and all of their components with my own money, so you're getting my own unbiased opinion about the product. Okay, so let me walk you around this awesome Game Boy Advance build. With the addition of the AGS 101 LCD, the unit becomes a bit more power hungry. Thankfully, that is addressed with the rechargeable 2000 mAh lithium-ion battery. The Game Boy Advance is recharged via a USB micro port on the bottom of the unit, which has an indicator LED to denote charging status. I haven't done a test to see how long the battery will last, but it has been advertised to provide much more game time. Looking around the unit, starting at the top, we can see that the link cable port is accessible and both the original L and R buttons need to be used. Moving on to the sides, we see that the two plastic end pieces have been replaced and are incorporated into the front and rear housing design. Boxy Pixel, however, has retained the feel and look of those end pieces. On the bottom, from left to right, we can see the power switch, the USB micro charging port, the 3.5mm headphone jack, and the volume wheel. The back of the unit is quite minimal. with your eyes immediately drawn to the very cool Boxy Pixel branding. There's also a nice engraving on the bottom to indicate the on direction for the power switch. And you'll also notice the absence of a battery door, since this unit no longer uses AA batteries and instead relies on the internal lithium-ion battery. The front of the unit just looks fantastic. Boxy Pixel did an amazing job recreating the Game Boy Advance shell. From the speaker grills to the start and select engravings, a lot of time and care went into the design of this kit. And this build really comes together with the AGS 101 LCD panel front and center. While I am a fan of all the newer IPS screen upgrades that are available nowadays, there's something about modding Nintendo hardware with other original Nintendo hardware. When the engineers at Nintendo were designing their games, they were doing so with a certain hardware set in mind. For Game Boy Advance, they were designed around the AGS 001, 101, and the micro screens. So, although not as modern as their IPS counterparts, I feel that using the AGS 101 LCD allows for playing games as they were originally intended. But again, I really do like all the new LCD upgrades out there, especially the ones for consoles that were never originally backlit, such as the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. Speaking of which, I did a 5-part series on backlighting the Game Boy Color, which you can see by clicking on the card at the top of your screen or in the description below. Man, just holding this unit in the hand is an absolute pleasure. It's hard to explain, but the amount of heft from the aluminum shell and just how solid the unit feels makes the Game Boy Advance a pleasure to play again and really renews the experience. So, there you have it, the ultimate Game Boy Advance build. Alright, let's talk about the giveaway. I'll be officially launching the giveaway next week. I will have all the rules and entry requirements ready, as well as the official poll to choose which Game Boy Color to give away. I will also upload a dedicated video with all the information you need, so stay tuned to the channel and be on the lookout. And if you made it this far in the video, you're awesome. Thank you for supporting the channel, and we'll see you next time.